Hey guys, this is going to be a long one with lots of facts, so keep your ears perked, keep listening to everything I say, and that way you'll get all these questions right. Let's go. So we're going to be talking about ancient civilizations today, specifically four of them, and these are the four earliest ones. Starting out with Mesopotamia in the Fertile Crescent and the Tigris and Euphrates, then moving over to ancient Egypt and the Nile, then hitting up the Indus Valley over here by India, and then lastly going to ancient China over there. So the first one we're going to do is Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia was started around the Tigris and Euphrates River, and that was really called the cradle of civilization. It was the cradle of agriculture. It was the first place where people discovered agriculture and that technology like plows and irrigation that we talked about yesterday or Monday, depending on which class you're in. So Mesopotamia, Tigris, Euphrates, cradle of civilization, cradle of agriculture. They invented lots of things because they were really like the first place that these things started happening. One of them were these giant temples called ziggurats. Cool word. It just means big temple in ancient Mesopotamia. The second one is the word cuneiform. And cuneiform was the first type of writing. And what they would do is they would get like a clay block and they would poke stuff into it. Each of these symbols here would mean a certain thing. There were hundreds, if not thousands, of different symbols. So their writing was really, really complicated. They also were, Mesopotamia civilization was also the first place where they invented laws and really wrote down laws and set them out for how you had to act and what kinds of punishments would happen if you didn't. Well, the most famous one was Hammurabi's Code, and Hammurabi's Code is famous for the law an eye for an eye, a life for a life. So what that really meant was if you poked out somebody's eye, then the punishment for that was poking out your eye. If you killed someone, what was the punishment? Exactly, they would kill you. So this is the first time that laws were written down, and the idea of justice, the idea of government and law started there. Excellent. Very quick. Moving on to ancient Egypt, civilization number 2. Ooh, where's that at? That is right here by the Nile River. Remember Mesopotamia, Tigris, and Euphrates. Egypt, Nile. Come on. Oh, there it is. All right, so Egypt developed along the Nile River in northern Africa. Here you can see right here, Mesopotamia, Tigris, Euphrates, Egypt, Nile right there. These two areas together are called the Fertile Crescent. And here's a map of Egypt over here. Almost all of the Egyptian civilization was right around the mouth of the river and then around the river down here. So they're famous for lots and lots of things. One of those were their pharaohs. Another was the pyramids. They built these pyramids as burial places for their pharaohs. And I've seen this mummy right here. It's actually literally made of gold, and they found it inside one of these pyramids, which was awesome. So mummies are another one of the things that they're famous for. They put the pharaohs, when they died, in the mummies, and they put those into the pyramids. And then they would write all over everything with their form of writing, which was called hieroglyphics. Hieroglyphics also had a symbol meaning each word, so it was really, really complicated. And still to this day, it's difficult for people to read because there are so many different symbols. If you want to see a funny video about the ancient Egyptians, go ahead and go to that link. It's just kind of a joke, just for fun. Ancient Egypt was another one of those places that used a lot of the agricultural technology. You can see here's one form of technology, and then these canals in here, these are another form of technology. See if you can figure out what those are. Exactly, you got the plow, and then you have irrigation. Third one is the Indus River. That's right here in the Indus Valley. That's because that river right there is called the Indus. Let's check it out. So It went all around the Indus River. Other Indian civilizations grew up around the Ganges over here, but the one we're talking about is this one right there. You can see these two rivers over here. What two rivers are those? Boss. The Tigris and Euphrates. Over here you've got the Nile River, and then we're going to see the next one on the other side. So the civilization of the Indus Valley did all the things, or a lot of the things that the other civilizations did. Like they used irrigation, they used the plow, they developed agriculture. But one of the other things that they did was they had a surplus of food, meaning that they had extra food. So because they had a surplus of food, they needed somewhere to put it. And they built these things up here, which are called granaries. They would keep them up high so the water wouldn't get into them and the food wouldn't rot. But they could put their grain up there, and that way when there was somebody who needed food, they had extra to give that person. Or when the crops failed that year, then they had extra food to go around and people wouldn't die. Another reason that a surplus was important was because it made it so they had extra food and they didn't have to work all the time. So then they had time to play games and do things like make art. And these are some examples of that really old school art and games that they did back in the Indus Valley. Last one is ancient China over here. And ancient China developed along two rivers. So there are actually two of them here, one, two. One was the Huanghe, or the Yellow River, and then the second was the Yangtze River. So you can see the Yellow River up here and the Yangtze down there. So they did tons and tons of things that still influence our world today. Calligraphy is a really big one. That was their form of writing, which as you can see was totally different than the Egyptian hieroglyphics or the Mesopotamian cuneiform. And Chinese still use calligraphy today. It's one of the hardest forms of writing to learn how to read and learn how to write, because there are 2,000 different symbols that they use to mean different syllables or different words. Another thing they did was they built what's called the Great Wall, and here's a piece of it right there, you can see. And that was to protect China from invaders coming at them from the north. The Great Wall, funny story, is the only human-made structure you can see from space. Cool, huh? They also had really famous architecture. You can immediately recognize a Chinese influenced building by the way the roof is, by the materials that they use like this, and some of the motifs that they put into that art. They also invented gunpowder, which clearly had a really big effect on the development of civilizations. But they originally used it for rockets firing at their enemies, but it was also used for things like fireworks. All right, so one thing that wrapped all these civilizations together are the physical features that surrounded them. We're going to talk about 4 different ones here: mountains, deserts, plains, and coastlines. Hopefully you already know a lot about the rivers, so that shouldn't be too much. Rivers clearly were needed for agriculture, travel, and trade. They increased cultural diffusion because you had people going in all kinds of different directions. This city right here, hopefully you recognize that. We're also going to talk about deserts, and mountains, plains, and oceans, which all protected these civilizations from invaders. So check out this map right here of China. So you had ancient China was in here, there were the 2 rivers. And China was protected on these 3 sides by the deserts on this side, the mountains on that side, and the coastline on that side. So that allowed the Chinese civilization to grow up without influences from the outside and without being attacked too much, because they were protected by those physical features. So see if you can figure out how the physical features had an effect on the following civilizations. So check out ancient Egypt, that's what it looked like back then. Desert, river. So ancient Egypt clearly they developed only along the rivers, which is where people could farm and they could grow crops. But it was really hard to attack the ancient Egyptians from here because you couldn't travel across the desert, and you couldn't attack them from here because you couldn't travel across the ocean. So the ancient Egyptians developed their own culture by themselves, insulated from everybody else. What about the Indus Valley? Same thing, right? They're protected by the mountains here, the desert on this side, so they could develop by themselves. You've got a couple of review questions at the end of this. That's it.